My name is Tim Draymond, and I'm the Executive Director of Social Innovation Generation and a co-host for this evening's event. And SIG is really proud to be able to share our Toronto-based Inspiring Action for Social Impact series events with MaRS Global Leadership Series. SIG and MaRS have been working together on these events for the last 2 years, and we've been really fortunate to have brought some really truly exceptional people from around the world, social innovators and social entrepreneurs, to be able to share their thinking with people here in Toronto. Later this year, we have invited Lucy Stevens from the New Economics Foundation in the UK to speak about co-production. Ilse Trunik, CEO of MaRS, will throw a spotlight on how the strands of mainstream innovation connect with social innovation. And we will also be presenting a series of webinars with the likes of Sarah Schulman from In With 4, Michael Quinn-Patton on developmental evaluation, and Charmian Love on corporate social innovation. But tonight, however, we are very fortunate to welcome Kate Sutherland. Kate is originally from Toronto, although now calls the West Coast home, though I think she's a bifurcated individual like many of us have been, and she feels comfortable in both places. She is an author and social entrepreneur who helps change agents and social benefit initiatives become more innovative and effective. As a consultant, trainer, and coach, Kate has helped hundreds of leaders and organizations to be more nimble, resilient, and aligned with core purpose. Those are wonderful things to be. Kate's 2 books are Make Like Work in Groups, 10 Tools to Transform Meetings, Companies, and Communities, and Make Light Work, 10 Tools for Inter-Knowing. Both these books are available for sale this evening, and Mina wants to know that she's there to be able to make sure she can sell a lot of books. We're evaluating her work today based on the number of sales she does, so please help her out, and Kate. Kate is also the regional director for the program What's Your Tree in British Columbia, co-founder of 2 Block Diet, and founder of Daphne Lane Plastics Recycling Depot, all grassroots citizen engagement strategies. Kate is here tonight to discuss how we can revolutionize the way we work together. Please join me in welcoming Kate tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. So as Tim mentioned, I'm from Toronto originally, and it's sort of exceptionally sweet to be here, to be able to kind of close a circle in my life or to reopen a new circle in my life and to share what I care about deeply in the place that I come from. And that's revolutionizing how we work together. I have, from my work in community and organizational development, found that a few simple shifts in perspective can really radically transform how I work and also how the people that I work with work. Whether it's transforming how we are in a meeting or working on a project, or whether it's about engagement and collaboration with partners, all the different ways that we work together can benefit from what I'm sharing tonight. So I'm really excited to share it. And I want to start with an activity that helps us come present and that helps us connect to our own experience. So inviting that we take a moment to tune in or sense into what's the energy in the room right now. What's the level of the energy here? And what would you say is the quality or the qualities of the energy at this moment? No, I'm just asking you to take a kind of a reading yourself and just kind of lock it in. And then I want to do an experiment where I invite you to think of a time when you've had something that was an exceptional experience for you in a group. A time that really, really stands out. Have you got one? It can be, just trust what's coming. It doesn't have to be a big deal, but just something that, when I say it was a standout experience in a group, something that comes to mind. And then I invite you to turn to the person next to you or near to you, and that you each have 2 minutes to tell each other the story. And it's mostly for you, telling the story to help you re-access that experience. Okay, so it's thinking of a time when a really positive standout experience in a group, and telling the story. You have 2 minutes with a partner. Okay? Has everybody got it? Go. So closing the loop on the experiment is to just ask yourself, what's the energy in the room now? Yeah, and the quality, like when I sense in now, there's a vibrancy, there's an aliveness, there's energy, there's a kind of a buzz. Does that, yeah. So I'll unpack that a bit more, but just at the moment, if you were to think about the qualities that supported your outstanding experience, like what were the conditions rather that supported the outstanding experience? If you just call out at this point.
Just connecting on a basic human level, a person to the most fundamental level of connection. So it's not really about what you're discussing or about what's happening. It's
Just that personal connection, the energetic connection with another person. Okay, yeah.
There was a sense of you had to first let go. Like there was a sense of, there was utter frustration that sort of led up to it until everybody just let go.
Aha, letting go.
And that was what made it really special, was everybody just let go.
So there was that experience of a group going through the pressure cooker to letting go.
Hitting a wall, letting go.
Yeah.
Aha!
It was amazing. Yeah. And everybody was in awe.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Other
Shared goal. Shared goal.
shared goal. Yes. Yeah. I hear one more. Yep.
It was sort of openness without judgment. So the ability of people to kind of listen to you and sort of accept what you're saying without you feeling that you in some way being sort of filtered or maybe judging some things.
Okay. So not judging, the openness. So we all have like this really, really deep experience of I think it's fair to say everyone's had a great experiences, outstanding experiences in groups. And what we did just there was what's called a mini appreciative inquiry, right? We focused on a positive experience and then we reflected on it. What was it that helped it happen? And in doing so, there's 2 pieces that come. One is the energy lifts, right? You have energy to move in a whole other way, because possibility, you're focusing on what's possible, not on problems so much. And then the other piece is that you kind of remind yourself, what are the conditions that support things to be great? Yeah, so you can play with that and reflect on it more. What I find is that simple shift from focusing on problems to focusing on possibilities applies in absolutely every moment of our lives. Right? It's bringing in what's called an appreciative lens. I think of it as a kind of a foundation for doing transformative work and having more fun. What it sometimes gets talked about as the positive, focusing on the positive, I like to frame it as focusing on what's life-giving. Because sometimes, as Kathleen has sort of alluded to, it can be really challenging. What's life-giving isn't always comfortable or fun, but there is a rightness to it, and so it's giving that space. Right. Why is it important that we get better at working with each other? Kind of painfully obvious, but every human system needs to be reimagined and re-envisioned and shifted. And we need collective intelligence and collective wisdom and collective capacity as never before. our traditional ways of meeting and working are relatively linear, and they aren't up to what we need to do. So I see it as being kind of like a situation analogous to rural China in the 1960s, believe it or not, where there was a desire to improve the health outcomes, and there was not enough money to pay for doctors to go everywhere. So what Mao did was invite 30,000 people to train in basic Eastern medicine and Chinese medicine and basic Western medicine. And then these were people who were villagers, and he named them barefoot doctors. And the barefoot doctors lived in the village and had bare feet because they worked in the rice paddies alongside their neighbors. And they had the capacity to bring in information about hygiene and about nutrition and about how to reduce epidemics. And the healthcare outcomes in those villages improved dramatically very quickly. So I hereby dub all of you barefoot facilitators. With the idea that with a few tools, you can significantly shift the outcomes in the groups that you're part of. So my question has been, what are the tools? And what I think of is that there are people who've been working in groups for decades. One of the tools we're going to talk about today is, trust theory developed in the 60s and 70s. And I think of the way quantum physics and chaos theory are still called the new sciences. That again, we're still living in a kind of a Newtonian paradigm. We haven't integrated. So it's how do we quicken the diffusion of the best theories of how to do work in groups? And my thought is that you take what's complex and you distill it to the most potent, simple concepts and disseminate them as fast as you can. One of those we've already touched on, which is the idea of appreciative inquiry. And the core of that is focus on what's possible, not the problems. Right. So what I want to do is introduce 3 other lenses. And I'm curious, I've asked Leah which one is her favorite. So your quiz for the evening is which one of the 4 that we introduced do you like the most? And you don't have to play favorites, because the real magic is when you work with all of them and they just complement each other. Yeah. I want to just do one more piece, though, which is to say, how did I get into this way of working? And it started in Toronto. I worked here doing community and organizational change in Energy Probe, which was across the street, and in all sorts of social movements. I was involved in women's safety on public transit, and in the anti-nuclear movement, and in the urban transportation movement, and sort of it rippled, the peace movement. I was a pretty happy camper doing things that were very meaningful to me. And I heard about 2 projects and got involved I don't know if you've ever had a project that called to you so much that you kind of pulled out all the stops. So it's like I was drawing on everyone that I knew, every network that I called all the chits. I was so on fire, so engaged. And I sort of have the metaphorically, it's like I was just like, putting myself way out, way, just like fly. And I did a face plant that was, if I remember, just being in the living room and feeling absolutely devastated, like I was crushed. I had no, what happened for me was I can't carry on as I have been. And I formulated, I have to find another way of working. And in 3 days, a friend gave me a book that was written by one of the founders of the Finhorn Foundation, which is a community, an intentional community in Scotland. And I felt I had to go. And I took my savings, took everything that I had, and went to Scotland at that time. And I arrived, it was April 20th. So what are we today, April 15th? It was beautiful in Scotland at that time. They were having a heat wave, and there were daffodils in bloom, and it was just absolutely gorgeous outside. And inside, there was this huge lineup at registration. I said, sod that, I'm going to go out. And I was walking around. I had just arrived, and it was, at some sense, the first time that I was quiet and still and not having to rush to get anywhere in probably years. And I was walking, I remember, just strolling like this, looking around, and I heard a voice. And the voice said, everything you need is inside. And I had this instant knowing that that was what I had come for. That was the different way of working. Kind of like it landed in me instantly. I had this thought, I can go home now. I don't even have to stay for the programs. I can save my money. I could go home. I've got it. And then I said, I realized I didn't know how to live that. How do you live? Everything you need is inside. So that's what I've been doing, is figuring that out. And I see that at the core of it, is this, I mean, actually it just keeps going. It's like a cone for me. But one big part of it is working intentionally, consciously, with the power of perception, intention, intuition, and consciousness. So tonight is more about perception, but they all interweave. So it's just to say that these tools are actually like Trojan horses, in that if you start working with them, they work on you as well in really glorious ways. All right. So what are these tools? Oh, these tools are like maps. This is a map of Vancouver from the perspective of bicycles. So that's a way of seeing the city where you focus on bicycles. And this is a map of the same city looking at outcomes and well-being of children. And Vancouver, historically speaking, looking at where the salmon rivers were in the 1860s, 50s, there it is. So they're maps, they're ways of seeing. So you can look at a group by analogy with all of the maps all of the lenses are viable ways of seeing the same group. And you can overlay them and mix them up and work with them. Yeah. And they are appreciative inquiry, as we've touched on already, trust theory, chaotic design, generative dialogue, adaptive cycle, enterprise facilitation, theory U, process-oriented psychology, integral theory, and conscious co-creation. And today we're focusing on these 4. So, the second one is looking at trust. And that theory says that the most important and the most important dimension of any group situation is the level of trust. That so what that in every group that we are somewhere on a spectrum between high trust and high fear, right? And that the more you can move yourself and a group towards trust, the better the outcomes will be. Yeah. There we are. Sorry, I should have been using this. It's the work of a guy called Jack Gibb. And that book came out in the 70s. And the levels of trust that he identified were from punitive to cosmic. And you can express those looking at, he did it in many ways, but he mapped the focus of energy is a good way to understand them, to see what's happening in a group. What's the focus of the energy? What are people focusing on at different levels of trust? And he noted that in any particular group, people usually, like an organization, there'll usually be people functioning on a span, and usually 2 to 3 levels of trust are present in any organization. If it's wider than that, it's hard for people to be in the same organization. So often people who are at a gathering like this will be people who have higher levels of trust than the people that they're working with. And just in case that's you, because it certainly has been me, I found it challenging. Right. So what I invite you to do is to turn to a different partner, and you might have to get up and move around, and to reflect on the level of trust in a group context that's currently a challenge for you. And just to take a couple of minutes. So that's just to sort of be with this and say, where is it? So you've got, say, 2 or 3 minutes. So you can stay where you are, or you can move back, whatever. So if you reflect on your experience of the situation that's challenging, and you contrast it with your peak experience or your what was a standout experience earlier, what does that reveal about what supports trust? Yeah.
Well, for the experience that I had shared, I see number 6, like emergent,
Yes.
being freedom searching. Like definitely the searching was a piece that, because we had shared stories and they were both about going from like feeling like you were really low in the group to being really high. And it was through that kind of those emergent activities. So we moved to that level.
Right. So it was by just searching, by being open, by...
Yeah, and maybe 7 too, right? Like I think expression,
Mm-hmm.
right? People expressing, listening, integrating what they were getting from it. Like the openness, someone talked about the non-judgmental.
Right. Yeah, so... Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, based on our conversation, it's a sense of belonging.
Mm.
So if they don't feel like they belong,
Yep.
then it's going to sort of unravel the whole trust strength.
Right.
And they'll just dissociate and go straight up to or slip down to 2, in terms of just doing what they have to do to get through.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they feel like they belong, then they'll start to pass number 5 and they'll start to explore.
Right. So that, yes?
There's something about an expectation of reciprocity often.
Uh-huh.
And it's interesting that you said nothing about the nature of the group, right? Could this be the country as a whole?
It could
as
be.
a nation?
Yes?
Is it a leaderless group, like a social movement? Or is it a management team which has a leader? You're probably talking about all of those.
That's one of, there's a quote in the book from Jack saying that the power of trust theory is that it applies to all sorts of situations. It applies to the baby learning to walk. It applies to building rocket ships that go to the moon. It applies and it's interesting about leaderless groups because what Jack worked in organizational change with Fortune 500 companies. He taught management and leadership and organizational work. He was considered by many to be the grandfather of organizational theory and organizational development. He was very influential, and he came to this understanding, like that he distilled it basically all down to trust. And he said that when you have trust, that automatically, high levels of trust or increasing trust increases the openness. So if people feel trust, they feel that kind of belonging, they feel that they feel trusting, then they're more likely to be open about what they care about, what they want, what they need, what matters to them. And when that's happening in a group, you get more realization, being that you are more actualized, more realized. You are able to work on what you care about. You're able to give your gifts. You're able to express what is most alive in you. And he said, when that happens, you get interdependence, which is that he saw this over and over and over again, as though it was like naming gravity, as though it was like saying, this is a law of nature. You can take it to the bank. If you increase trust, you'll get openness, you'll get realization, and then you'll get interdependence. And out of that, he believed very strongly in the power of leaderless groups and self-organizing systems. Or reframe that as leaderful groups, that you've got self-actualized, that when we are, if we can increase the trust in our institutions and systems, it's sort of like everybody will line up where they're supposed to be. You'll get the person who's nerdy and really wants to do, but right now he's over doing something else, or she's over there doing something, but if you could really increase trust so that everybody said what they really felt, what they really thought, what they really cared about, then you'll get this sequence unfolding. Yeah. So the question is, how do you do that? How do you increase trust? And he talked a lot about the quality of the environment, that you want it to be welcoming. You want it to be a place where people feel that they belong, and that they belong as their whole person. And part of how you do that is you extend that to yourself, so that you are authentic in the moment. You're not playing a role which kind of distances you. It's like we all can pick up when somebody's just being nice. It's like if you are, you'll cultivate more trust if you're really authentic. If you're crabby, you're crabby, and then people know you're crabby. It's like that. If you're open, so it's our own. Anyone in a group system who chooses to trust to the place that they show up as who they really are, they choose to say, all of me belongs here, will increase the trust in that group, whether or not they're in a formal leadership position.
And I think it's interesting because if you translate that to political leaders,
Yes.
it's very true. I think as a society, we're coming to a place of wanting leaders to accept that they make mistakes.
Right.
And you accept leaders that don't pose for the role, but
Right.
they engender that in the response of.
Yeah, and it really has affected how I facilitate, because when you're facilitating, you can get caught up in being professional and sort of lose your humanity, and I pay a lot more attention to, I'm human, and it's a paradox because when you're working with this tool, part of what you're doing is opening a context. And that is a role. That's a very definite role, is to create a context that allows other people to trust. But paradoxically, you do that by holding that role really lightly and being yourself. Yeah, I hear and see nods, so I hear the nods too. I can hear it. So that's what the kind of punchline is. If you want to, two punchlines. Trust begets trust. So if we're able to choose ourselves to trust, and we just spontaneously say, no matter what, this is one of Jack's lines, no matter what happens, I trust that fundamentally I will be okay. I recommend putting it on the fridge. It's just like, it's something, you know, that, because I think at this time where we are in society, fear is kind of lurking all over the place. And the more of us who are anchored to trust, the better. And the other piece with it is to increase the vitality of your groups. Really pay attention to the level of trust. And to notice, because you all have experience of groups that aren't working and groups that are working, and sort of be scientists to investigate what is it that helps people feel that they belong? What is it that helps get a meeting off to a tone where people are real? They're showing up as who they really are. There's lots of pieces, but that framework really says it's worth it. Focus on it. Pay attention. Yeah.
Just a quick question. In the comments that you're making,
Yep.
you referenced how you behave as a facilitator.
Yes.
You're different now than you used to be.
Right.
So as a facilitator, typically I would assume you're an outsider working with another group,
Yes.
which I would suspect is really quite different than if you're talking about a group itself functioning together without an external facilitator.
That's right.
You want to comment on that a little bit?
Well, my prayer is that all of us, one of the differences is I include myself more in the group when I'm doing this. It's like I only work with people that I identify with, so I speak about we. I don't speak about you guys need to do this. I include myself. And I see that when we're embedded in a system, it takes a bit of, to anoint ourselves, or to frame it either as being more conscious participants in a group process, or to really allow that we could make a suggestion. We could be this barefoot facilitator, that we don't have resources to bring external facilitators into all our meetings. And so that you could share this lens explicitly with people and say, you know, I learned this cool thing, and if we work to cultivate trust in our group, we're gonna do better. Whatever. There'll be lots of options, lots of creativity about how to integrate working with this, and that's something that I'm in an ongoing conversation about. So I'm happy, but I want to move on because there's, if that's okay, there'll be time for questions at the end as well. So, moving to the next one. The next framework is about, just a second here, paying attention to what's happening moment by moment in group dynamics. So it's right in that moment. You know, you're at the meeting, and what is it that's happening right now? And that's where I also want to bring in an experiential exercise, so that you have a personal experience before we talk about the theory. So I want you to imagine that you have a really challenging situation. We pull an actual challenging situation, or it could be a scary, wonderful situation. Just think about one. Trust what's coming. And to ask yourself, what would you like to eat in this moment? Like what would it be helpful to eat that would give you the courage? Sort of the way, you're facing you're at a threshold, or you're at the edge of a cliff. And for Popeye, it was spinach. And what is it for you? Okay, have you got it? Yeah? So that one quick takeaway is next time you're in a challenging situation, just imagine that you're eating that food. My food is roast, like steak, and it helps me get really, it brings out this whole grounded sort of, I have more. And then other situations, you don't have to limit yourself to one food. I like fish, so it's protein is mine. But I know people for whom it's mangoes and people for whom it's cayenne pepper, so there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's just, what are those qualities? What are the qualities of the food? So you can just reflect on that for a moment. What are those qualities? So the notion is that those qualities are something that are outside of us, that we don't feel that we have, and we need to bring them into us. So what we're creating here in our minds is that we are in our normal stance, we're in our primary process, we're in our primary, how I see myself, how my main identity, and life is pulling us this way, and it takes us to the edge all the time. Life is always taking us to the edge. We resist it, but we're drawn to challenging situations. And that edge is to what is secondary for us. In some way, it's outside of our lived experience, and it challenges us. We have an edge to it, and the food for us at a personal level is representing what's secondary. If we can bring that into us, then we'll be more, we will grow and we will amplify, and then life will keep moving us along, and that'll be we'll be integrated. Our primary process is there, and there'll be a new edge. Okay. So this happens over time, but it also happens moment by moment by moment. This dynamic of primary and secondary process. And it happens at the individual level, at the group level, and at the societal level. So the primary process in society, for example, is very focused on money and not so focused on the interior dimension or spirituality. There will be communities, many nonprofit organizations, where the primary process is on relationships and caring and nurturing, and the secondary process is being really effective and practical with money. So it's like every group and every individual and every moment has a primary and a secondary process. That's this lens, which is coming from process-oriented psychology. It's a slice of the work of Arnold Mindell. Yeah. So from there, just to reflect on that with a different partner. So this means, like, now you can't just go one side to the other side. Now you have to get up and move, unless you're creative and can find another way to do it. But what does this say? What's the primary and secondary process, as you understand it, of a group that you're part of? Just what does this lens help you see? Is that clear enough? No? Find someone for whom it's clear. And listen to them, okay? So you've got like 4 minutes. So there's time for questions later, but just to pull out what I think is one of the most important teachings of this lens is a really, it's the naming of a really core dynamic of something that I believe happens all the time at all levels. And it goes something like this. A secondary process, something that represents a secondary process goes, I have something that I want to bring to your attention. I'm not interested, just go away. I really need to bring this to your attention now. I'm sorry, I told you I don't have any time for this. It is absolutely time that we deal with this. You're so unreasonable. When you calm down, then I'll listen to you. The laughter, right? There's something that we need to talk about. I'm sorry, I don't have any time, right? The theory is saying that's happening. That happens inside each of us. So for us to own it, that there will be things that challenge us that we don't like, we don't want to deal with, and that are secondary, and that the primary process wants to hold on to itself and resists it. So there'll be times when there's somebody in the groups that you're part of, and you might be the secondary process, or you might not. But that dynamic is sort of like saying it's like gravity. It's not good or bad, it's just what is. And how to recognize it, name it, and be skillful at working with it. There's lots more to say, but just that piece, the laughter in the room is exciting for me. So I really hope that it helps you have more compassion for yourself and for the people in the group. And I think that the human condition, as we recognize that our healing is really inextricably tied with shifting the primary process of Western civilization to be more open to what's disavowed, more open to what is knocking on our door, that it will make a huge difference.
It's like resisting change.
It's like resisting change, exactly. And life is taking us there, and it is uncomfortable. Like change is uncomfortable, and it's less uncomfortable if we trust. So going back to the first lens, if we trust that fundamentally we'll be okay, and if we open and we move through things. Okay, so just so that there's time for questions and talking about things, I want to race through the last one. Because I really like giving multiple lenses because they mutually inform each other and they become exponentially more powerful when you start working with them together. So the last one is the key takeaway is to get crystal clear about your purpose. Super, super, super crystal clear about your purpose. I used to teach workshops where how I understood what I was doing was teaching these tools. And then I reframed it that my purpose is to revolutionize how we work together. So I went from framing it like this to framing it like this. And my energy, what I allowed through me, increased, and the impact of the workshops, it went from being just something in the head to something that was much more powerful, whole person. So now I invite us to think about a typical description of the purpose of something that you're involved in. This will be, so by that, for example, with the education system, its purpose is to educate our children. My stab at a more life-giving one, hi there, is to cultivate happy, fulfilled, and engaged citizens who contribute their gifts to create thriving communities. That's my stab at it. So to take, again, this is now, instead of working with the partners, it's just to imagine a group that you're part of and how it's often framed, what its purpose is often framed as, which tends to be, typically is more of this upper layer. And if we had more time to really let yourself have a stab at naming what would be a really juicy, glorious purpose, an inspiring purpose. And can you imagine, as just, because the mind is amazing, we can do things quickly. What happens as you make that shift? What changes? More energy. Yeah. More passion. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The statement is organic rather than sterile.
More organicness, more aliveness. Yeah.
It's easier to create problems from the first than it is the second.
It's easier to create.
Problems, when the purpose, well, the problem is that
Yeah, right.
the second one's hard to think of problems.
Great. Yeah. So it's more asset-based, or it's more life-giving, it's more generative.
More depth.
More depth, right. So this shift is at the core of chaotic design. And that's the work of D. Hawk, who was the one who invented, or he co-founded the credit card clearing system that we all carry in our wallets, Visa. And he was around in the 60s when the banks wanted to own and control how credit cards rolled out into the world. And he said, he had a passion his whole life for institutions that do what they really are supposed to do. And his creating of Visa gave him a platform where he went worldwide asking people, how much of your time, so this was his question, how much of your time, I didn't put the quote here, excuse me, do you spend getting around stupid rules, flouting crazy policies, having to formulate policies that you don't believe in? He would ask, in audience after audience, it was over 50% of people's time. Some people it was as high as 80. So the potential that's there, if we shift our human systems towards this kind of shift, if we put this statement at the center, then what we're going to be doing is chaotic, in that we go from having chaos, where there's not enough structure to support good things happening, too much order where life gets stifled, and instead we find that band in the middle that's chaotic, that's really alive. And we do that by starting with purpose, getting that deep, rich understanding, then clarifying what are the principles that come out of that. If we're going to achieve the purpose, what principles do we need to work on? And sometimes you have to go back and reframe the purpose once you've identified a few principles. It causes you to have a deeper understanding, to go another layer deeper. And those principles, if we're working with integrity, dictate who needs to be involved. And sometimes you have to go back to purpose again. So you keep working iteratively. And then you develop a concept, which in his case, if you're doing a true, full chaotic design process, almost indubitably you're going to have a different organizational design than all of the ones that we have now. So then you create a constitution, and out of it come practices. And he expressed it in this Fibonacci spiral, because the property of a Fibonacci spiral is that once you establish the pattern at the beginning, it keeps on in its self-organizing way, going out in ever wider circles. So you move away from having to get what you want by structure and policy and rigidity, and you move to more ever increasing levels of self-organization based on this juicy, delightful, clear, passionate, life-giving framing of the purpose and how that unfolds.
It's almost like research, getting the foundation and then allowing for each person's creativity.
That's right. So you don't need to control when you get it established really, really clearly and well at the beginning. And it's about when you're doing that in the context of an international financial institution, he identified a number of principles that allowed him to stand for what was trying to emerge in the face of unbelievable pressure, like, you know, pharmaceuticals, banks, military, who has more clout, who has more like capacity to get what they want. The banks are incredible, and he named it so well that nobody owns Visa credit card clearing system. It's a completely chaotic, very different kind of organizational structure that does beautifully. We don't pay high services. You know, like some parts. Anyway, we could go into more detail there. So that was what I wanted to play with and introduce, and to invite questions for the time we have. We have about 20 minutes, just related to anything, and we have microphones. So,
Just so we can get them on.
right, get the questions. Yeah,
Just your voices, you need to get up.
yeah.
The very first thing that you did, the appreciative inquiry, really reminded me of some of the Malcolm Gladwell and Daniel Ariely priming when they did experiments where they would, you know, in terms of honesty, if you read something from the Bible before, you were more likely to be honest. Some of that's been disproven, actually, or it hasn't been replicated, at least, some of that work. I don't know about Ariely's. Gladwell's hasn't been replicated, but it just reminded me of that sort of mindset. So I guess if you would sort of comment on the concept of priming and how that kind of fits into that, or if you don't see it that way.
I don't know. I don't know the work, so I can't comment directly. I think it's. I think the appreciative lens is a choice. It's like, do you see the glass half full or do you see it half empty? As, you know, really simplifying. And when we're in a context where there's a lot of negativity, we tend to get sucked into that negativity too. So it's for me, it's about making a conscious choice. So it's like our society is priming us for negativity. I don't know if that's fair. The primary process, in a lot of ways, is negative. There isn't, joy is peculiarly secondary. You know, it's not good news. People, if you're in joy, you're likely secondary in a group, and you're likely disturbing and rocking the boat for people. You know, so I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's a slightly different, you're right, it's a different lens than the other, which gives you a frame of reference. This is more of an approach to going forward. It's more conscious. One is more unconscious and one is more conscious.
Right. Yeah, and I think the conscious is really powerful. It's like naming what's happening and working with it consciously. Yeah.
Hi, sorry I was late.
No
I
worries.
have a quick question. You talk about group dynamics. If you're in a group, my question is, should you name the fact that change is uncomfortable? Like my example is I'm new to an organization, I have to mold change, I have to create structure. Should I name that it's uncomfortable? It's a process that we're going to all go through.
I think naming the moment is really powerful. way of working. It's like, yeah, I think you don't, it's a delicate thing because you can flush out negativity too. So you can say in some ways this is uncomfortable, in some ways this is exciting. So that and you can work with purpose. So that would be that if people will go through a lot, if the purpose and the reason that you're doing it makes sense to them.
Okay.
They also go through a lot if they are if they feel that they belong still, so that they have information about it and they're kept informed and so that they're not in a situation where rumors start flying because that diminishes trust. Yeah, yeah.
I just want to come back to your last slide about the chaotic and the starting point being this clarity of purpose.
Yes.
I'm just going to take a university as an example.
Right.
Because many universities are challenged by more than one purpose, let's say teaching and research.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we fool ourselves often in group processes to think that with words, with our command of language, we are capable of great precision. So in whatever context we live in, university may be a bit, it's just because we all are acquainted in some way with universities. I just use that example because it's a bit universal. But it's also interesting because the scale of universities is large. And I would offer actually that pinning down that fundamental and essential purpose really is enormously tricky. So to the example of your restatement of the purpose of education,
Yep.
for me, it was an interesting restatement, but it introduced with the broader outcome of thriving communities, the question of what is a thriving community. In this group, there may be some level of agreement, but the broader the group is, the more challenging arriving at some precise understanding of the meaning of that outcome is going to be.
Right.
So I just want you to comment on that, because my sense is that the process that you invite is one that's imbued with too much assurance about our capacity to do that well.
I think it's a great question. The lens for me is that it's like on my shoulder all the time. What's the purpose? What's the purpose? What's the purpose? So that with the other lens of the primary, secondary process, who's defining the purpose in a university setting? How much of it is defined by business? How much? What are the pressures that are taking something from what we hope and intend it to be, which is, and that's the argument, I guess, but more fundamentally about well-being of our communities, and then what does that mean and all of that. But it's a way of highlighting those tensions. Who's defining the purpose and what is the real purpose? And it's not about saying those are easy conversations. It's about saying they really need to happen. Because human institutions, I think when you get a statistic like 50 to 80% of what people are doing feels disconnected from what is meaningful to them, in that it's disconnected from teachers who are spending all of their time taking attendance and doing evaluation work. And there are pieces that are important to it, but there's also, the curriculum has become disconnected from what kids really need or whatever. So it's about having those conversations, and they're really radical conversations. And they for a university, that's huge scale, very challenging. But for a lot of contexts and that can feed into it, it's more waking up the possibility that, hey, we can change. You know, like if you're within a department of a university, that's perhaps going to be a more manageable scale, and that'll ripple. Yeah, it's like cracking big nuts. I wouldn't start there. I'd start with smaller ones. Yeah.
I would like to ask if you could comment on that very same question, but looking at it through the prism of trust.
That's a beautiful question. I would say that universities have lost the trust of most people, that I think universities have really, not all, but many have gone astray, that students are aware that the research and publish-perish dynamic that universities aren't teaching, that the tail has begun to wag the dog it's gone too far. So there's a breach of trust, and that there's a kind of a cynicism that people are moving towards credentialism rather than that there isn't about finding what's your passion and really nurturing what's most alive in people. That there's kind of like an industrial model of education that doesn't support young people to figure out who they are and to be open about what they care about, and where there's the structures of evaluation don't encourage people to disagree with their professors, and there's like trust would be woven in through lots of ways. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
From your stories earlier, I understood you'd worked in environmental things and you talked about circle. So I was wondering, and I'm sort of assuming that you probably have been informed by or connected with Aboriginal communities and their learnings and their approaches. So I'm wondering if you could share a bit about that, if I'm correct.
Well, my main work with Circle was at Findhorn. That's where I really worked. And I'm trying to filter it through these lenses. It takes me to a different lens, which is the 10th lens in the book is conscious co-creation. And it's my favorite lens. And it's the one that's most secondary in mainstream society. It's the most woo-woo, is really saying that there's the way Aboriginal people understand that when a raven flies by, that's meaningful. When there's that there's how you hold yourself when you're setting out for the hunt matters, that you're giving thanks for the animal, that you're doing it in a way that's respectful, that you're working in conscious co-creation with nature, that you haven't disconnected. And that to me is the one of the ways that I understand the challenges that we face is that we've disconnected from ourselves, and we've disconnected from each other, and we've disconnected from nature. And it's as though we've lost our inner guidance system, so that we really think it's normal to do the things we do on a daily basis, that the newspapers are screaming at us. Well, actually, they aren't screaming at us, right? But that we know at some level, increasing, like the pressure's mounting. We really know that our disconnect is unsustainable. So I believe that Aboriginal people, on the whole, have that lived. It's an indigeneity that is common to other indigenous wisdoms and includes the major religious traditions, that there's a kind of an understanding of ethics and of morals and of how to live well that's embodied and it's not, there's another lens which would say not to privilege, it's not about us going back, it's more about transcending and including and embracing that wisdom with the incredible science that we have and the incredible capacities that we have. So it's not romanticizing the Aboriginal, but it's not, somehow we live relatively pale. I think often of what I call ho-hum meetings, like things that are flat. It's not, people look for help when things are terrible. It's like we've got to get a facilitator in here, we've got to make some changes because things are terrible. I think the greater challenge that we face right now is when our systems are okay, like they're not terrible, they're just kind of grinding along, status quo normal, instead of being relevant to our times and as alive and connected as they could be. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, with your obviously vast experience in terms of facilitating groups, what commentary or advice could you perhaps provide to us in the context of how could we be successful in facilitating groups to approach this notion of appreciative inquiry in a kind of an open sense? Because especially in groups that are a little bit cynical and sometimes there are dynamicisms around lack of trust a little bit, how would you turn that around, or what's the good way of approaching that so that they can actually do the appreciative inquiry?
Depending on how cynical things are, you might need to work on the trust side first. And I have started with a single colleague. So I've worked, when a context is really difficult, I work on myself and I work with one other person from that context and do an appreciative inquiry with them or do trust building with them. And if you go with process-oriented psychology, that lens, if we'd have more time, it includes the idea of the field. That we think we're separate, but we're actually more like iron filings with a magnet moving us around. Like we're in a context. So if somebody in the field is aware that we need a stronger North Pole and fills that energy of North Pole, and then get somebody else, you can gradually build. You can shift the field, and it's not. No one would necessarily know that you're doing it, and you can have profound impact. Yeah. So it's sometimes what you want to do is go to let's talk about this. Let's get it all out, and if there isn't trust, that can backfire. And then you can have a cynicism of, yeah, we tried that. We tried to deal with it, but nothing changed. So there's something about stealth. But it's not stealth. It's more quiet work. Like, there's very, very simple. I love that Kathleen has named belonging. Like, there's something, if you come into a room and you see, at the beginning of those meetings, if you greet someone, I, thou, and you see them as a radiant being, and then you greet the next person. I was once facilitating a meeting where they said, you got to watch out for, I forget her name, Colleen, let's say. She is so negative and so destructive and so everything. So I made a point of meeting her. Like, I just took that story and threw it away. It's like, that's how other people see her. I don't believe that that's all of who she is. I believe that might be part of who she is. And I greeted her, and the meeting flowed. So you individually can see people as magnificent and experiment and see what happens. Yeah.
Great.
So, yeah.
Kate,
Yes.
it's my pleasure to thank you for giving us such a wonderful introduction to your book. And I wanted to kind of tell people that, in a way, I'm a little worried that maybe we drew them here under false pretenses with the title that related to your book and how you talk about tools to transform groups, working in groups and things like that. When in actual fact, I mean, one of our interests is, as SIG, is obviously we're here working on an agenda to help catalyze an ecosystem in Canada that encourages and enables people to develop and scale the wonderful social innovations that we all have. And obviously, whereas individuals like a Thomas Edison might have a light bulb that could lead to a social innovation, in actual fact, I would say that social innovations don't happen just by individuals. They happen because of groups. And so obviously for us, there's a direct correlation between groups that know how to be transformative and social innovations. And in addition, I just wanted to draw people's attention to there's 10 major ideas that are in your book, and each of those ideas touches on a major theme of how people actually generate, develop, and scale social innovations. So for us, it's wonderful. I know a lot of you are here because you're interested in figuring out how can groups work better. But we're in the way that you talked about raising the bar in terms of the more empowering and transformative idea about where this is all going. We're really interested in those groups being able to be real engines of social and community change, which I know that you are too. And so I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for your really thoughtful and engaging way in which you so seductively drew us into so many of these themes of your book. And there's still copies of your book over there, so I want to make sure that people know that they can get one. But I want to thank you very, very much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.